podcastjuice.net.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Prince Podcast here on podcastjuice.net. Of course, my name is Mike Woodine, and also joining me today is Mr. Big Sexy and Saxer. How are you?
Oh, man, I'm doing great. I'm knee-deep in this Ezekiel Elliott appeal, but it's all good. It's all good. That's why we get paid the big money.
All right. And ladies and gentlemen, we got a special guest today coming from Minneapolis, as a matter of fact. This brother, Mr. Ralph L. Crowder III, I mean, I get that right, is an independent journalist, and he is here to so he has a series called Controversy, and it's Prince's death in the city of Minneapolis. Let me read a little bit here. Independent journalist Ralph L. Crowder III recounts details and has created an alternative Black perspective series surrounding the death of Prince and its broader reflection of family and community issues in the city of Minneapolis. So, Mr. and I'm just butchering your name, Crowder.
Oh, you got it right, bro.
Oh, okay, Crowder. Sorry.
Crowder.
How you doing, man? How you doing?
Man, I'm doing good, man. I'm in transition, still moving toward my African name, so we, you know.
Oh, okay.
You got everything cool with it, everything the way it is, brother. Yeah, I'm doing good today, man. How y'all doing?
Man, we're blessed. Good to have a conversation with you and to keep the legacy of Prince out there and to control the narrative as usual.
Yes, we got to do that.
Yeah, so let's just start at the top, man. Can you give us sort of an overview of Controversy, your series here?
Yeah, man. I mean, it all kind of stemmed from being hands-on and documenting as an independent journalist the tragic passing of the brother and the reaction with the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul, really the whole state actually, but central cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. It was amazing to see, as people move to transition to death, it's amazing to see how one's contributions are appreciated more in passing than really they are while they're living. And to see thousands of white liberal folks parading, dancing in downtown Minneapolis at one of the most racist clubs in the city, historically, First Avenue, a venue that wouldn't even let Prince perform there until he appeared on Saturday Night Live when his first single popped off, and he was a major recording artist on a major corporate label. To see the contradiction of the history of this city and all those white liberal folk here in the Twin Cities taking over and controlling the narrative in front of this club was absolutely amazing. So I moved to kind of tell an alternative narrative and perspective on Prince, his legacy, his passing, and the contradictions of more specifically Minneapolis, but I'll say inclusively the Twin Cities. Oh. And so hence we have the title Controversy.
All right. Wow.
That narrative. Yeah.
So I already know some people massively triggered over what you just said, right? And that's okay, because I want to jump in. I want to go into a lot of the things that you just brought up. Let's just start from the First Avenue perspective. Now, to be clear, I'm not from that area. I'm from Seattle, Washington, which I would think may be sort of similar in terms of population to blacks to other people in that particular area. I think we make up less than 10% of the population here in Seattle. I would imagine Minneapolis is not too far that sort of perspective from blacks and other people in that races in that area. But as a Prince fan, a lot of us got introduced by the movie First Avenue. And
Purple Rain.
Purple Rain. I'm sorry, the movie First Avenue.
Yeah.
Here we go. Pull my Prince card. the movie Purple Rain, we see First Avenue. It starts, let's go crazy, and it's iconic scene. Prince performing there, and it looks excellent. I remember as a kid, I wanted to come to First Avenue after watching that movie. I was like, that's the spot. And you got Morris is in there jamming, The Time, Modernaires with Dez. They getting it in, I was like, okay.
Sure.
But tell me the reality of, you grew up in that area. What's the reality versus what that movie presented in terms of First Avenue?
Well, the reality at that time, they was making that club money. That's what that's all about. And I'm talking from personal experience, and we talked a little bit prior to the interview tape. And coming from that class of '89 in high school, and very directly involved with promoting and establishing different venues in terms of hip-hop within this community. First Avenue, man, has been notorious for its absolute racism, with opening their doors to black promoters and basically black music in general. I mean, again, if they're controlling the narrative or they're controlling the environment, First Avenue is going to benefit. But in terms of embracing black promoters and black music and black audiences, First Avenue has definitely been one of the biggest. They've been one of the biggest bullies on the block in terms of the club scene here. And so, as years have gone on, and as culture has changed, I still feel that my observations are still the same. You have to fit a certain kind of criteria, to actually have access in certain venues. And that's from your corporations all the way down to your local club venues. And every city has this story, so it's nothing new. I'm not saying anything new that's not felt in Seattle or Sacramento or Chicago or New York or whatever. This is the story of Minneapolis, and the way that First Avenue has been promoted historically to benefit and reap the profits from the absolute amazing talent of this brother Prince and others from this city has been kind of it's not a good look for us in this city, especially when Prince moved to, because of those issues, establish his own club venue literally 3 blocks down the street called Glam Slam, then turned the Quest.
Talk to me a little bit about Glam Slam. So Prince opens his own club. I mean, what was did people immediately flock to this, and was it a successful?
Glam Slam was definitely more open, accessible venue for black artists, black promoters, and black people to basically, move their way and navigate around the club scene. Now, interesting enough, Glam Slam and then called the Quest. Now, you have to kind of let's reflect a little bit on this time period. We're kind of like in basically the mid-'90s, where the crack epidemic was probably at its peak, and the impact that's had nationally on our communities. And so at that particular time, Glam Slam, as well as other club venues, were but more specifically Glam Slam, because there was a higher concentration of us there. Of course, we bring some of those elements with us in certain club environments. That comes with that nightlife. But the interesting thing is, Prince's club was under a huge amount of scrutiny, in terms of maybe some fights that might have taken place there sporadically. I would say no different than the strip club down the street, 2 blocks down the street on Hennepin Avenue, that showcased black women, dancing nude for the same kind of clientele, or maybe a little grimier clientele. But for some reason, Prince's Club became under an attack by the downtown business community. Now, these are the same people that were expressing their love for the brother and how great he was for the state and for the city of Minneapolis and so forth in his death. But these same people were the most critical people in the business community that moved to shut his club down.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of contradictions, and then there's self-responsibility for us as a community as well when we do have something of great value, because we have very few black ownership opportunities or established black places of ownership in our communities as we are today. When we do have these things that are established in our communities, we have to do a better job to preserve them and to take care of them, because we already know that they're definitely going to be under that kind of attack, because it presents a financial threat to the dominant, mainstream business community. And what better thing could we have to control our music, as Prince did, move not to be a slave,
right,
control our businesses, and control our money. And so, it's an amazing observation, man. And we're talking about Prince, but as I'll say again, this is the story of black people wherever we are.
Right. And let me ask you this, because you live in that area, you've grown up in that area, and I'm interested. So you coming out of high school in the late 80s, this is golden age hip hop time as well.
Yeah, 1989. Golden age hip hop.
Yeah,
yes,
another summer.
Exactly.
How did you guys view? Now, obviously, at this time, Prince was already huge with Purple Rain and all the other things that he's doing. But before that, like going back to the 80s, early 80s, how did African Americans view Prince in Minneapolis at that time?
Well, I will say this. I'm sure, just like most people, and from my memory, Prince was not necessarily well received in his own town at first.
Go deeper into that. Zoe Williams.
I would dare to say that Prince was an outcast. You understand? A very talented musician, but socially maybe not as accepted because of his different presentation of the time. And that was a huge issue in terms of how he was received here locally. Now, just like anybody, though, as soon as you hit some kind of big accomplishment and have what a lot of people would call success, then here we go, and then all of a sudden now we want to rock with you. So Prince had it's kind of like an interesting exchange of that kind of reality within the community. Now, mind you, the brother was a little older than me, and but I can still kind of remember, even personally in my peer group, the kind of interesting relationship that we had with Prince's identity and his presentation, even within, my peer group being primarily, of the hip-hop era. Right. You know what I'm saying? I can be more specific. There was a phenomenal, actually this needs to be documented, a teen club, a hip-hop teen club in uptown Minneapolis, and in those familiar with, Prince's catalog, Uptown, but in uptown Minneapolis, it was called Bernadette's Uptown YMCA Teen Club. Huh. And this teen club, I was one of the DJs, along with another DJ who moved on to work with Prince on some, became his DJ as well as I think he produced some music with him, a cat by the name of Brother Jules.
Brother Jules, yeah.
And, and another brother named KK Zulu. Now, we were all the primary DJs and promoters for this Uptown Teen Club called Bernadette's. Now, Bernadette was Mrs. Bernadette Anderson, who Prince lived with Andre Simone. And they also, that the basement is part of the story of how, some of their beginning groups started, over on the north side of Minneapolis. So, in that time period, you had Public Enemy, Big Daddy Kane, Boogie Down Productions. We doing that kind of thing.
Right. I hear you.
So Prince's identity was a little kind of like, like when we talked, if you went out of town and you said, hey, yeah, I'm from Minneapolis, and everybody would say, oh yeah, Prince, and we're, kind of like our people, yeah, it's Prince, but yeah, you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly.
Right.
It's the same thing when you look at those old pictures of Dr. Dre when they was in the Wrecking Crew, and it was heavily influenced by Prince. And like, yo, y'all on some funny shit.
Yeah, but we could not front. You can't front on some of the music.
Yeah, it's talented.
You know what I'm saying? Because, for example, Soft and Wet was a classic roller skating jam, going back to the early, to the mid '80s. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people that was the soundtrack of the roller gardens in St. Louis Park, a suburb of Minneapolis, and it was also the soundtrack of the Dust Bowl in St. Paul. Okay. You know what I'm saying? Because you're dealing with two different communities. Minneapolis, you have the north and the south side, and then you have also St. Paul. So, I mean, as soon as Soft and Wet hit, it was a wrap. So at the same place, you had that dynamic of kind of Prince's perception, is the way he expressed his identification, but then you had the extreme talented musicianship. You know what I'm saying? That was rooted in multi kind of influences, from Jimi Hendrix to James Brown to, you keep on naming the names. So, I mean, that's just what it was. So, he definitely was a presence, but I would say in terms of his initial start, he was not received in his own community. He had to earn that, and then once he got on the wave, then you already know what happens. When you're on the wave, everybody wants to ride it. Right.
Which is, I don't know if the word, indicative of a lot of things sometimes within our community, where if it's something different, we're not really riding with it totally yet until we see, we got to see, sometimes the dominant culture sometimes give it a stamp if it's different than what we're used to, and then we jump on it, which is a problem in some ways. But I wanted to just go back, because you mentioned Bernadette, the YMCA thing, whatever, YW, like, and I didn't understand that.
Uptown Teen Club.
Say that again. I'm sorry. Say it again.
Bernadette's Uptown Teen Club. There's actually some YouTube clips on that. Wow. I mean, it was you just can't. This was a hip hop club, and it was just, I'm really want to do a documentary about this experience, because it was just amazing to have this all black kids from all over the Twin Cities, St. Paul, North Side, South Side, surrounding areas of suburbs, all met in Uptown Minneapolis every weekend, and this teen club was on par, I would say, with any hip-hop teen club in America at that time period. And it was just a phenomenal. It's just one of those unknown stories,
right?
In the narrative of Prince and his connection to Mrs. Bernadette, how she was active in the community and served the community and provided opportunities for the youth.
Yeah, because that's a little head busting to me, because obviously we had Andre on a couple of times, and we know some of the story, and you hear about his mother, but to hear that actually she would have a hand in sort of sheltering and bringing in a Prince, But then maybe you could argue to say a generation that comes after that with the hip hop, she is actually one of the people putting it down for that generation in that era. That's the documentary right there. Like, that's an unsung hero. What a woman, man. That's
facts. I want your audience to look up Bernadette's Uptown Teen Club.
Wow.
There's some clips out there on YouTube, but it is definitely some rare Black history of that time and place, and probably the most powerful, influential time of hip hop in the years of 1988 to 1989, and just a little bit of the 90. But okay. You know what I'm saying? But it was also a huge transition in the culture, because we started out with African medallions and power to the people, and was really on the movement. But within a year and a half time frame, you could see the transition to
gangsters.
All of a sudden, kids was wearing white T-shirts, having the big cell phones, and the Raiders starter jackets.
Right.
You know, and that represented that influence, that coming influence, and popularized by corporations to really take out the positive messaging of hip-hop at that time through the drug culture. And that's nothing new generationally either. That happened in the 70s, and it happened in jazz. I mean, that's a whole different story, but this is a continuum of Black culture and influence under attack.
Let me ask you this. I'm going to deviate from Prince just for a second, but I'm always fascinated with this topic, because we talked about, Black power rap, or whatever you want to call it, conscious rap. Before it was called conscious rap, it was just rap. Like, you had to be, Cats was on, some Islam, the 5%. That was a main part of the culture. But then, and I remember, and I wanted to ask your opinion. I remember when, NWA came out, and that was actually during this time. But it wasn't, it was kind of like, it was a balance, so we didn't really, it was just like, it's easy and them doing their thing. But I remember when Ice Cube went solo, and when his first album came out, and I remember, I knew who Ice Cube was from, NWA, but then I remember my buddy, he was like, yo, you gotta listen to this album, man. This is some shit. Now, at the time, we're heavy.
Which one?
America's Most Wanted. His first solo album.
America's Most Wanted.
So this is probably 89. And we're heavy into Big Daddy Kane, Chuck, and everybody else. But I remember feeling like, I don't want to like this, Ice Cube. You can't deny, I couldn't deny that the boy got lyrics, tell a story. But when the music came on, it was on a higher level. Obviously, you had the Bomb Squad, but I was like, I don't want to like this, because in my mind, he's contradicting almost to me everything I'm listening to in terms of the themes of what he's talking about, at least the way I perceived it. And I just thought, this is some ridiculous stuff, but it's so infectious. And I had to okay, I got to give it up. This shit is dope. Start bumping this. But I'm curious, because you kind of spoke on it, where there's this other theme coming into hip hop that coming in very strong. Like, did you have any resistance when that stuff started coming out?
Oh yeah, because I could see the impact that it had directly when the music came on. Because it's deeper than the music, you know what I'm saying? And many times we kind of want to place all of the responsibility on the artist. Well, sometimes the artists are just really, being what they are. They're kind of bridging the gap between real life and art. You know what I'm saying? And at that particular time, when you really rewind the history, Los Angeles was under attack, chemical, biological warfare. Los Angeles was the hub for one of the most major extermination movements of Black communities. You know what I'm saying? And when you really look at the conditions that were happening there, of course, that's going to appear and show into every fabric of community institution, including the musician, the artist, the poet. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Now, many people can stand in those environments and not be impacted and still kind of keep a positive lens on their art. But if you're seeing a total destruction of your neighborhood and your community through the various different things that takes place in the crack extermination plan, then a lot of that is going to be heard and felt in your energy and your music. And that particular time period needs to be reflected on, no doubt, because I would say arguably, after 1990, it was a wrap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Straight up. It was a wrap. And it wasn't, this is not limited to the artists or any group. I'm talking about this movement was backed by major corporations that were invested in controlling the black community narrative, the power of the music, and really moving to put the community more in subordination of the independence and the freedom and the knowledge and aspirations that were felt by many through the power of hip hop. That needed to be killed, and they did a good job doing it. They did an excellent job doing it.
I think too. You gotta.
You know what?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say,
go ahead.
You gotta also. I think we also sometimes too have to remember. I know for us, movies were just as influential, if not more, actually too. Because I remember, I remember when Colors came out, and we didn't know nothing about no gangbanging. And when after that movie came out, you would have swore everybody was from L.A. or started dressing that culture, the slang culture. And I love these, Menace to Society, of course, Boys in the Hood. A lot of these movies took that culture that it was sort of isolated and then brought it mainstream, so everyone started that. Then so you started seeing people claiming, Crips, Little Rock, Arkansas, different. It ain't got nothing to do with the street, but that imagery was so powerful as well, backed with that music. It was just a wave that took over.
The same people who put money into producing movies are the same people who own the record labels, right?
For sure, yeah.
Right. So, the same people who, it was a calculated thing that happened, and it was so hard and heavy and quick and had huge implications on families and communities that I really don't even think we have truly begun to fully dissect what that crack movement really did to us in all areas of how that presented itself to further disfranchise us from ourselves and from, being that independent force that we're capable of being.
Want to bring it back around to Prince, and I believe is in 91 or so when he started with the Diamonds and Pearls album, and of course the Get Off single. You started to see, and because before then, Prince sort of, I wouldn't say turned his back, but there was definitely a line difference between Prince and rap and hip hop music. But I think because it became so powerful, he figured it out a little bit and started to incorporate those elements into his music. And I'm very curious, like, what was the hometown's take on some of the rappers that Prince worked with during this time, particularly like Tony M, Mr. T.C. Ellis, which I understand was doing things out in the community as well. But I was curious, what did you guys, coming from a hip hop sort of that time frame and then being in hometown, this was the Prince world town in a sense, at least on the outside looking in. Yeah. What was your take on that?
Well, Prince wasn't hip hop, period.
Okay.
I mean, he was of a different generation. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You know, just point blank. I wasn't feeling Prince in terms of, now let me correct that. Now Prince's music, some of his music was dope. Period. Right? But Prince was not hip hop. And I think he grew to actually appreciate hip hop as he got a little wise, you know what I'm saying? And as times changed, and I'm sure he could sense that hip hop was not a fad or a trend. It was actually a institution, you know, a cultural, you know, kind of phenomenon that is right now the move to outsell rock and roll. You know what I'm saying? So this is all a time kind of span where hip hop has actually grew and became a dominant cultural force. At that particular time period, you couldn't really say that about hip hop then. You know, yes, it was definitely a presence and it was a strong presence, but it wasn't a dominant cultural force as it is now. And although it's been filtered and you know, kind of co-opted, it is what it is. But yeah, my perception around any conversation with Prince and hip hop at that particular point in time was, that just wasn't what it was. Period. Okay. I mean, you don't talk about Prince and hip hop. You talk about him in music. You know what I'm saying? There was no hip hop conversation.
Well, to be clear,
effort.
I would say it wasn't hip hop. I like to think there's a difference between hip hop and rap. But in terms of him adding rap into his music, right? With some of these other rappers, were you guys aware of these other?
We was aware of that, but and I'm only speaking for myself, right?
Okay.
And the peer group that, you know, for this area that, you know, I was in relationship with. You might talk to somebody else and they might be like, yo, that was dope. You know what I'm saying?
Gotcha.
So, but Prince's influences at that time in terms of rap, people wasn't really feeling that. And maybe the people that dug Prince was feeling that. You know, if you was a heavy Prince fan, maybe you did dig that. You know what I'm saying? But in terms of, I'm talking about from a hip-hop kind of lens, But ironically enough, I'll even push back before the time period that you talked about. Prince was heavy. His influence was heavy into hip-hop. If you look back on Crush Groove,
mm-hmm.
And Prince was always on the scene. His music was in one of the most, you know, pioneering hip hop movies prior to Wild Style. You know, so, you know, with Sheila E. and his music being on that soundtrack and his sound being on that soundtrack.
Right.
You know, that Minneapolis influence was very much a part of the time. And so it definitely had a connection to hip hop culture, but in terms of it, you know, being kind of like part of the music of the culture or having kind of respectability in the music of the culture. No, it was, and I'm speaking for myself, Prince had his separate identity, separate musical sound, but still had an influence across kind of cultural influence with the hip-hop community, put it like that.
All right. Also, too, I wanted to ask you about the Minneapolis Sound because, again, you know, to be clear, yes, we have Prince, but we had Titans that came out of that area, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, right?
Oh, yeah.
Jesse Johnson's coming out of there, obviously Andre Morris.
Alexander O'Neal.
Phenomenal
artist.
You have some of and then coming after them, sort of keeping that musician point would be Stokely in Mint Condition. And things of that nature. When you were in that younger period and sort of the people that came right before, they were like on that musicianship. They were musicians. There was the Minneapolis Sound, which I'm sure you remember was very big in the 80s, mm-hmm. that whole, even the imagery of it. Were you guys influenced by that to pick up pick up an instrument or, you know, or to dress like that?
Nah. Just remember, we was on, I'm talking like, on some hip hop, we was on 2 turntables, microphones, and, trying to do what we could do to, forward the music and the culture, you know what I'm saying, in this area. Okay. So, I think the musicianship and things of that nature was for people who really wanted to be musicians and were highly influenced by the Minneapolis Sound, which was about a full spectrum of quality musicianship. Mm-hmm. But, on a different side, depending on, maybe what age group you were talking to at that time period, you had a lot of people who were heavy. 2 turntables and a microphone, parties, independent hip hop promotions, groups, things of that nature. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And it was all kind of coexisting within the artistic landscape of the black community at that time. So that's kind of the duality of what was happening in Minneapolis. On one end, you had this huge worldwide cultural phenomenon of the quote-unquote Minneapolis Sound that touched a lot of people with just quality musicianship and an enormous catalog of contributions to R&B and black music in general. And then you also had this a group of a community that was, again, heavy into hip-hop, and this whole platform and art form of the DJ, the MC, and these independent parties, that move to organize and create opportunities to fellowship within that community as well. So, it was an interesting time period. It was an interesting time period, and I will be, the first to say that, I'm definitely proud of the legacy of that Minneapolis community, that Minneapolis Sound has created, that stemmed right out of here and went worldwide. I think of groups even like the SOS band that came here and had just, quality albums and singles, and there's just so many different groups that came out from here and was either cultivated, produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, or influenced by the overall sound coming from this area. You think of even groups like Ready for the World, the Deal, other groups from other areas of the country who the Force and Bees. Mm-hmm. And this area impacted a lot of different people from a lot of different areas, and was I would say a dominant sound for arguably you could put maybe 20 years on that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Even throw Ice-T in there. I remember Jimmy Jam produced a song for Ice-T early on. That it's interesting because to me, like, the Minneapolis Sound was, to me, like one of the last sort of the R&B sort of dominant styles, and right before hip hop sort of came in and just went crazy. Because I remember 81, and now again, a lot of music was sort of regionalized at this time too. It wasn't MTV, and so some things that were happening in certain areas you didn't really hear about in certain areas. But I remember like The Time and the Prince down in Houston, Texas. They ran the streets. I remember visiting there. I always say this all the time, and I didn't know what the music was, but I was like, "What is this y'all playing?" Like they look at me like I was crazy. Like, how you don't know what this is? This is the jam. And then, but I came from Seattle, where at the time I'm kind of like, we're heavy African bambaataa. We're very influenced. We're influenced by New York for whatever reasons in that early hip hop. But I remember like, whoa, this is a whole other thing going on here. And then years later, 1999, Purple Rain, the whole world is on his nuts. but it's sort of that, it was that juggling between that was popping, and then, you know, the rise of like a Run DMC and all of that was so heavy too. So it was like we're playing both of these things at the same time. And again, that heavy, as you said, that heavy Minneapolis influence, at least on the West Coast, you know, you could see it. You know, people were, you could see it in Dr. Dre and all the stuff they were doing, the imagery of them, the music, the dress, that style was heavy. That Prince style visually was just as strong, if not for even the music, and, you know, the whole industry was on that music. So, yeah, I mean, he's a pioneer of pioneers. I wanted to also shift a little bit here too, to talk about, because I heard you mention this before, about family and being connected and or disconnected from family, and just sort of how, in your opinion, what's going on with Prince and his estate, and you know, not having a will and different things of that nature. Like, what's your take on that?
I think that's one of the reasons why Prince was such a powerful artist, because of the pain that the brother went through in his own family experience. And, you know, again, I'm speaking as one who observes culture and, you know, where we are as a people. So all my comments are coming from that perspective. I'm not related to family, so I want to clearly say that. But I think Prince, just like a lot of us, brother, we his generation. Let's look at his generation. How old was Prince when he died? Let's just say, what was the age the brother died? How old was he?
He was 57.
So let's look at that generation. Arguably, you could say that Prince, at the age of 57, the time he was born, he could have been, on his birth certificate, he could have been a Negro. Right? Okay. That generation, his generation, came in at the tail end of being a Negro into being empowered to being black, moved to become another identity as African American. And between black and the Negro, for some in different communities, there was another term, Afro-American. So that's like 4 different identities within your lifetime that we had as a people. Then also, you had a huge attack that happened as a result of the years of the Black Power movement, 1968 to 1975, where the black community was under attack by the dominant, power of this country, which clarified its position as certain elements in this community being an ultimate threat to the stability of this country. So the same attack that we saw with crack years later, earlier we had another attack in black communities called heroin that did the same thing that it's doing now to white folks. But then when they did it to us in the early mid-'70s, they called us junkies. But now they call these white folks that are strung out on heroin, they're actually moving to pass laws to help them not even be incarcerated. But now it's a mental health issue. So just imagine his age group, the kind of breakdown in family structure that happened. And we're not even moving back toward the migration from the South to the North and all the generational kind of traumas that came up through that kind of brutality that happened in the South, that moved to the North because the white liberal condition is probably even worse. Because in the white liberal kind of attack, they kill you slowly. At least down south, they lynched you on a tree and they killed you immediately. But in these white liberal northern cities, they set up conditions to kill you slow. So let's look at a young man by that age group and look at the generational pain that took place in a family structure around all those things: drugs, lack of job opportunities, a proliferation of racist kind of institutions in small northern communities, and the outlet that music and the arts have to express the power of your experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with what happened more specifically with Prince, it just mirrors where we are as a black family, period. I mean, brother, me personally, I come from a divorced family. You understand? Many of my friends, the friends that I grew up with, out of 10 of them, I think one of them, their mom and dad stayed together.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how many families got caught up in that tornado? Do you know how that impacts generational wealth and the transfer of ownership of property or any kind of things that come out of a position of stability and family?
Mm.
So then we move to normalize broken families, broken relationships, and then we get in positions of tragic events when, because of the pain, one way or another, you might not even move to establish a will or an estate. And therefore, when you don't do that, the same white folks that wouldn't let you perform at their club, First Avenue, are the same white folks that are running the judicial system. And they're moving to move on your money. Because we lost all of our power. That's a hurtful thing, brother.
Yeah, I mean, dealing with that divorce, and you said a broken family, so I come from that, and the reality and or shame of that is the cycle sort of continues. So definitely I'm understanding what you're saying. I know a lot of us are, unfortunately, and that does help put in a little bit of perspective in terms of where Prince's situation is, and the relationship maybe with his family and family members, possibly. Can
you imagine how that affects your family dynamics when you're not connected as you should be? Look, brother, my mom and dad don't even talk to each other. They can't even sit down and talk about their own grandchildren. That's personal. That's my personal contribution to this conversation.
Right.
But my story is no different than a lot of our stories, and that's the same story of Prince, man. It might not be the exact same thing, but it definitely takes on some of those dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think these white folks are going to do right by you and preserve your money for the best of the family with all those dynamics? Absolutely not. And when they get done with you, they'll give you a little bit of change. They might set up a foundation for you and all that other kind of stuff, but you're not in ownership of what this brother, this tremendous legacy that this brother left. And that's something that we're going to have to deal with as a community. That's something that many of us are going to have to return to the pain of our families and heal some of that. Because the more that we allow ourselves for this to become normal, the weaker we're going to be and the less respected we'll be. And that's something we have to do. Forget white folks and forget everything that they can control and have influence on us. Let's talk about what we need to do.
What are some?
Because we're in Minneapolis, St. Paul right now, and guess what? There is no black club.
Mm.
All of them are gone.
Is there a African American? Is there an African American community there? Is there a place where there's some businesses and different things that people are doing, or what?
Yeah, but you know the story. Like any city, we got barbershops, hair salons, cell phone stores.
Gotcha.
A couple of corner store T-shirt shops.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a couple of restaurants, maybe. Is it any different than where you live?
Oh, well, we ain't got none of that.
Right. Exactly.
Ethiopians or anybody else, they got it popping, but yeah, we all over the place.
It is what it is, brother. And that's why we can be so powerful. Look at the brother's music, so powerful. Look at the kind of influence, the global influence this brother had on the world. But in his own hometown, we don't even got a black club to celebrate our music, to celebrate our people, to celebrate that accomplishment and that impact that came out of this area.
Yeah, I mean, one would say you have Paisley Park, but then the other thing would be to say I don't know if it's ironic or if it's a shame or it's just the nature of business that you would have Graceland being the ones,
Yeah, Elvis. Come on. P.E. Elvis was a hero to most. Right?
Right. But he never
the white boy who pimped black culture.
Mm.
Now he owns and is running Prince's. You realize Prince would never be having that.
Oh no.
You know that would never ever be even part of any possibility. This is a brother who actually told everybody, "I'm not a slave."
Mm.
And now Elvis is running Paisley Park. Get the fuck out of here with that shit, man. That's a shame.
It is.
And you won't have this conversation like this with a whole bunch of people in this city, and they won't tell it to you like this. Because the same people, at least, like I said, at least Prince told people he's not a slave. And unfortunately, you got a lot of people that are closing their mouths, and they won't tell it to you like this because they don't want to offend them white folks that own these institutions,
right?
That own our music, that own our mouths.
Mm. Wow. I want the listeners to
really, on us.
Yeah, I want the listeners to really think about what we're talking about, because you got to have an honest conversation about it. You don't have to agree with everything we're saying here, but just think about that last part. Great, and I'm not shitting on Graceland, but I'm just saying it sounds crazy. It'd be no different if somebody said the Paul McCartney estate or John Lennon estate is being ran by Ebony Magazine or something. You'd be like, huh? Like that?
Look, man, I'm shitting on Graceland. Fuck that shit. You understand what I'm saying?
I feel you.
Paisley Park should be run by Prince's family.
Right.
Period. And whatever is going on, they should, and that's why we need to do the work, brother, when we're in pain. When you hear the brother's music, it strikes an emotional chord. There's certain Prince songs that that he's speaking from a position of pain. That's why it's so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest artists have usually been the ones who have been vulnerable to experience the most pain. Think of Marvin Gaye. Think of Mary J. Blige. Think of, a whole bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that pain we got to deal with. And money does not heal pain.
What's interesting about Prince is I'm thinking what we're talking about. Prince was the kind of person who, from the outside, looked like he was taking a loss, but he was actually taking a gain. And what I mean by that was when he decided that he didn't want to deal with record companies in that way, and he would write the slave on his face, it would seem as if, man, he's going to torpedo his career if he's not going to allow these major corporations to be in control of it. But actually, he won by doing that. Now, from the outsider's point of view, it looks crazy. But maybe this would be the same thing with Paisley Park. It looks like, oh, okay, you're going to have these guys because they know how to do it. But maybe we got to be able to take that and use it as education to learn how to do our own business. And maybe it's not going to be seen as a success by some people because they don't have this major money behind it, but it'd be ours. But Prince was the type of guy who would do that, and he would come out and win, even though it looked like he, then years later it'd be like, oh, you know what, he was right.
Do you know how many moves Prince made that impacted so many different artists? Let's even have the contemporary kind of comparison with Jay-Z and what he's done with Tidal or Tidal or whatever it's called.
Tidal, hilarious.
The way he commodified the digital space online prior to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
The way he moved away from major record labels and establish his own kind of business entity. Think of possibly what kind of influence he had on Wu-Tang.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like the brother really made some phenomenal moves, and that maybe also lets me also want to introduce in the conversation, kind of the energy around the community of Minneapolis and St. Paul and the cultural community. You know what I'm saying? There are black people here that definitely were highly influential on Prince's kind of identification and move to become more independent and free in terms from, kind of like through a cultural lens in that as well.
Okay.
So, the brother definitely grew in his career on a lot of different levels. And I think what you saw at the end of everything is a young man that was in full control of his narrative and his art and his expression as a human being. And that's powerful.
Yeah, it is. And he fought for it too,
That's right. And just think if we would fight for those kind of principles, more of us in our community, how powerful we could be.
Well, man, Mr. Chowder, I want to end it on that note, man, because that's a powerful thing for us to think about. But
okay,
I want
Mr. Crowder too.
Crowder,
man.
I'm sorry.
Did it that time.
See, there you go. You need to go ahead and switch your name over so I can really say it right?
Yeah. No, I told you, man. I'm kind of transitioning to my African. You know what I'm saying? I'm going back to the '89 on people, man. But
okay.
Yeah,
say
but
that.
yeah, no, I appreciate that, brother. I appreciate the build with y'all, and I also want to thank you for establishing an independent platform of media and communication and having an alternative narrative to popular conversation, because it's easy to do a kind of a mainstream analysis of Prince and all the issues, of the influence. But, you kind of put yourself in a different position when you allow the multiple kind of expressions to be a part of an independent platform, and that's what we need more than ever. Not only from these conversations, but multiple discussions in our community. We need independent black media to be the voice of the people. That many times has to be the counter narrative of corporate media, which is having us highly watching Channel Zero again, back to those influences of early hip hop. You know what I'm saying? So
for sure. No, I appreciate you coming on.
We we got to continue to tell our stories, brother. So I thank y'all for having me on.
Yes, sir. And also I want to make sure we shout out Cindy Lewis for helping bring us together, man. So definitely want to shout her out. Also, again, I wanted to ask you, where can people see this series? Are you still working on this, or is it out, the controversy series?
Yeah, there's little clips online, and you can definitely see some things online in terms of like the Prince connection to Bernadette's Uptown Teen Club. But you can access our media that we produce, including the controversy series, on our website. And I'll say that it's Freedom Radio and that's AND TV.com. Freedom Radio and TV.com.
All right. I think the story you are telling is an important one that needs to be talked about, because there are a lot of books and different things coming out, but I like to hear all stories. And again, just even with the parts you dropped about the Bernadette thing, that's heavy, and I never heard that before, as much as I've tried to stay up on Prince. So definitely we need to have people with their own personal and or observational, awareness of Minneapolis to speak up. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I hope that the listeners go out and check that out. And again, if something sounds like you don't understand, I don't believe that, well, go look for yourself. Do your Googles, do your own research, and look at it in an honest light. That's how I like to say. My man, you're a little quiet there, Mr. Big Sexy and Sacker. You all right? You still with us?
I'm still with us. I'm just taking it all in.
That's what's up. All right. Well, we're going to get up out of here. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, check us out on Freedom. Wow, you got me. I'm all over the place. I almost said Freedom Train. Check us out on podcastjuice.net. Also, I got to invite you guys to check us out on YouTube. We have we've started our own YouTube channel. We've been blessed to have tremendous success very quickly. So I want to make sure that all the listeners are aware of our YouTube channel. Just look up Prince Podcast. You'll see some of our classic episodes up there. We're going to start putting some new stuff. So definitely check that out. Also, I will be in Minneapolis next weekend. Starting from the 7th through the 9th. I'll be there as a part of the PRN alumni event. Specifically,
at the Capri?
At the Capri. I'll be there, sir. Moderating one of the panels.
Man, we're gonna have to hook up there.
We got to chop it up. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So definitely look out for that. And also, lastly, continued thank you to our Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for your support to help this show grow and continue forward. So I want to make sure that I'm very appreciative of that. All right. With that said, let's get up out of here. This is Michael Dean, the Prince Podcast. Work it like a job. We'll see you next time. Peace.
This is a grown man hustle, baby, and I ain't playing around. So get your money up first, and we'll see who's down. I got a homeboy, said hand the key, unless it's on a chain, partner. It ain't for me, 'cause you can be the boss if you want the Don Cali. I hope you got an exit plan, come better rally. Had 2 years of ballin' while you're moving dope, and now you're 30 years straight with that soap on the road. Cool. 'Cause I just couldn't leave it alone, man, I'm cool. 'Cause I just couldn't leave it alone.